make this sharp, right, Ankit? One is, I think the cliched, don't get it carried away by the fear of missing out, the FOMO, as you would call it, right? That's one clear thing. And the extension of that essentially is, my advice would be invest only in areas that you understand well, right? As in, that's the first takeaway for me, right? Is what I would, if I were to tell this to a friend, that's what I would actually tell them. The other piece I think is about, I think people who are in the stock market will probably kind of relate to it better, right? As in, I use a term called, when you see something, you try to do something. Now, you can extend this to a variety of use cases, right? I think the key is to also understand that do nothing is also an option. I think people just have to be cognizant of that, right? So you see something, do nothing is also an option, is what I would kind of tell them. The other piece I think is in terms of as you go through these pitches, right? As in, obviously there are a lot of, I think, founders, I think with great presentation skills, right? I think the key is to actually differentiate between trying to understand the value to customers versus the value to investors, right? And I guess at any given point in time, I think one has to be clear on prioritizing value for customers, not necessarily because value to investors would be short-lived, right? And I would prioritize value for customers first, right? And I think then the valuation becomes, I think, just secondary, right? And that's what I've actually solved. So these three things would what I would advise any friend.
Great. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Invest with Dexter. I am Ankit Saraf, Senior Associate at Dexter Ventures. Quickly recapping, Dexter Ventures is a micro VC fund, earlier a syndicate. We've invested in about 30 plus companies so far across the spectrum of consumer tech companies across healthcare, finance, B2B SaaS, deep tech, AI. With this initiative of Invest with Dexter, we are unfolding stories of angels across India and globally from different walks of life, bringing to you yet another professional from an entirely different background from what you've heard so far. Without much further ado, as I previously said, there are about 20,000 angels in India. The angel ecosystem, the startup ecosystem is growing rampantly. So with this initiative, would like to bring forward another story for you to listen and be encouraged towards stepping into this asset class. Without further ado, I welcome Samdani Basha to the dais this time. Hi Sam, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Great. So Sam, for the benefit of our viewers, we'll start with your introduction first.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for that, Ankit. I've had a professional career spanning over 30 years, largely in strategic and operational roles, both in the B2B as well as the B2C sector as well. And I think a very broad spectrum across multiple functions and technology areas. I guess the only constant there has been trying to focus on delivering business impact through a combination of process, policy, technology, and not to mention people, so to say. And obviously 30 years gets you to do a lot of interesting stuff across multiple organizations. So pretty excited to be a part of this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for starting off this conversation. Since you've given your introduction, brings me to my very next, very interesting, and the question for the entire premise of our conversation. What really got you into, startup investing, the how and when of it?
Yeah, so I think the very first exposure to startups essentially happened over a cup of tea with a bunch of engineering batchmates in Hyderabad. We have this penchant for Hyderabadi chai, and we were a bunch of backbenchers who were actually sitting there and generally discussing, right? So one of our friends was actually working in TCS right now. He did talk about a particular venture capital at that point in time, and then said that his friend had invested there and so on and so forth. And that was essentially a starting point, right? Almost about 2.5 years back in time. And that got me to do a little bit of a searching around that particular company. And as I think fate would have it, somewhat of a surplus cash. And I think I've been investing in the stock market for a fairly long time by then. It's been about 7 years of investing in the stock market as well. And then I said, okay, why not this also as an asset class? Because by the time I was actually working in Flipkart at that stage. And as you know, the story about Flipkart as well, right? It's kind of well documented, so to say. So a combination of things, I think my own exposure to Flipkart as an organization, somewhat of a surplus cash, and this whole need to kind of diversify and get into additional asset classes, right? That's essentially what got me started there. And yeah, so that's where I am.
Great. That's a great starting point. So to continue this conversation, since you've been investing for 2.5 years in this space, how many investments so far, and what has been your sectoral exposure?
Yeah, so I believe I have about close to 20, 21 odd investments as of now of varying degrees of exposure. And essentially, it's been, I think the common thing there has been technology and kind of using technology to solve problems at scale, right? That has been the usual preference that I actually have. And I myself come from that background as well. So that's something that I actually understand. In terms of within the tech, right, because of my current role, I obviously had a liking towards education. So that's one area that I have invested in, about close to 5 to 6 startups in that particular space. Followed by health tech is another area that I have kind of invested some money in. And beyond that, I also put myself in the shoes of a consumer. And I do look at a few opportunities. And whenever I realize that that's a product that I can actually use for a fairly long time, and I have the ability to experience the product, I've taken that view as well. And so that kind of broadened the entire scope to a bunch of companies. Like I've invested in food as a sector, for instance, right? And like education, there is health tech, there is some bit of fintech, and
Mhm.
then there's food as well, is what I've currently invested in.
Got it. Since you have a very diverse portfolio and you've invested in about couple of decade of companies, right? So, two scores of companies for that matter. Help us understand, share some success stories where you've seen, when you've entered early and they performed phenomenally, and other side where you took a very conviction-driven bet and couldn't perform really to your expectations, right? You may choose not to name any of the startups, but more around description and what they have been doing.
Yeah, so I can take a shot at it, right? As in, I think the definition of success, right, it becomes a little relative. And I think 2 years, I believe, is a very short time period to actually declare a success, right? I just want to give that disclaimer out, so to say. But I think if I just reflect back and actually say, do I feel very good about those investments? The answer is absolutely yes, right? Do I give them 10 out of 10? The answer is absolutely yes, right? And yeah, but that said, they still have a long way to go. And I don't mind taking the company name because I also happen to be a consumer for those products as well, right? Like, for instance, there is Drink Prime, right?
Okay.
And obviously, every family needs water, right, for drinking purposes. So it's a subscription-based model there.
Mhm.
So that's one company that I've invested in. I think it's doing extremely well. And at least because I use the product day in and day out, right? Right from my kids to my wife, everybody uses it, right? So I have that comfort of, I know this product will actually do extremely well, right? Similarly, there is Urvan as well, which is into gardening. Like thanks to COVID, I actually took up to terrace gardening, so to say, right? So I'm actively engaged there as well. Same experience. I tend to buy the product, use them, and see if I'm going to be a long-term customer for them, right? And then I do that. Then there is Healthy Shore, for instance, right? That's another company I'm extremely happy about.
Mhm.
Followed by I'll stop it with another company. Obviously, it's a long list, and I generally feel good about a lot of my investments per se, right? The other is actually Medicine VR, which is into once again the education space, right? A very specialized area, using VR for a variety of use cases in the medical space, so to say. So I think these, according to me, have been very, very good finds. And I think thanks to, I think, investment networks like yours, right, and other companies that I've invested in as well, right, for even giving us access to these organizations and being fundamentally part of their organization, I think their journey, right? And I think the fact that a couple of these also kind of allow us to actively contribute to their growth story, right, in whatever form or shape we could, because it's a large pool of investors, right? I think it's working extremely well, according to me. And like I said, not really eyeing a valuation markup as of now. I think it's a long haul. And,
Mhm.
and I believe it takes a substantial amount of time for them to generate true value for the customers, right? So that's on the positive side. And on the negative side, I think I'll not name the company, so to say, right now, right?
That's fine.
But I guess it's not gone that very well. It's in the education space itself, right? Obviously, the projections were a little out of whack, right? I think the sizing was completely out of whack in retrospect to actually realize that, right? Post-COVID headwinds and so on and so forth. And I think it's still kind of continuing as an organization today, but I think it's down to a bare minimum. It could have been a lot better, but that's one thing I feel bad about. But I haven't completely written it off. I did manage to make a few follow-on rounds as well, because I think you need that ability to kind of sustain for a fairly long time, right? It's very unfair to kind of just pull the plug at an X amount of time. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's a list of 5 things, 4 positives and 1 on the negative side.
Thank you so much. I'll bring your attention to a little more specific towards us. You've been with Dexter for more than a year now, invested with us. You know, you're now joining hands with us on our next initiative, which is our fund as well, right? Well, we talk about the fund a little later. How has your experience with Dexter been? And please feel free to be candid to the core.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, I think I'd love to call a spade, right? But I think, yeah, truth be told, I think Hair Originals actually gotten through you folks, right? Thanks for that opportunity very clearly. And if I were to just call this out as bullet points, right? I think the selection of companies, I think, has been really great from you folks. I think it kind of gives me a very good perspective. The attention to detail, I think the due diligence process, right? And the way you go about the entire process has been extremely great for me. And obviously, I think you and I connect quite often as well, right? I think it's not like, I think, okay, I'm some kind of stranger for you and so on and so forth, always available. So essentially a combination of, I think, good work that you guys do and what you present to the investors. And you also back it up with a fair amount of an empathy and a connect as well, right? I think that's something that I really like about you, which is also one of the reasons I think I signed up for the subsequent initiative as well, right? Yeah, so I only have positives about you folks. So thank you for being who you are as of now.
That does put a lot of onus on us in terms of continuing to perform at your expectations. So really, thank you so much for the kind words. As we've still not performed on the TVPI end for you, but hopefully we can give you those financial returns as well in the longer term, right? So, as I was mentioning, we moved from the syndication model where we were doing, investments on a deal basis to now helping our lot of retail investors build their portfolio and, double down or increase stakes on some of them which they feel are, more likely or may connect with them a lot more than other opportunities. So that's where the initiative of Dexter Ventures has come up, where we are launching a fund. We are letting our retail investors become LPs to the fund, and we are helping them create portfolio first and then increase stakes otherwise across the portfolio and on their winners, right? Excuse me. So thank you so much for showing trust on that initiative as well, and we welcome you to Dexter Ventures as well. So yeah, that's a great moment for us. Before we move on to the last and the most exciting segment of my podcast, I'd like you to answer one final question. So as I was saying, there are about 20,000 angels in India active, right? You compare it to US and China, while we stand third in terms of the number of startups, where the count for angels is much, much, much lesser, right? So my initiative has to bring out people, bring out and uncover stories of people like you for them to really understand and get a dive into this asset class. So, what message or what advice do you have for first time angel investors or those who are contemplating to start investing in this category? And how do they go about with it?
Yeah, so if I were to make this sharp, right, Ankit, one is, I think the cliched, don't get it carried away by the fear of missing out, the FOMO, as you would call it, right? That's one clear thing. And the extension of that essentially is my advice would be invest only in areas that you understand well, right? As in, that's the first takeaway for me, right? Is what I would, if I were to tell this to a friend, that's what I would actually tell them. The other piece I think is about, I think people who are in the stock market will probably kind of relate to it better, right? As in, I use a term called when you see something, you try to do something. Now, you can extend this to a variety of use cases, right? I think the key is to also understand that do nothing is also an option. I think people
Absolutely.
just have to be cognizant of that, right? So you see something, do nothing is also an option, is what I would kind of tell them. The other piece I think is in terms of as you go through these pitches, right? As in obviously there are a lot of I think founders I think with great presentation skills, right? I think the key is to actually differentiate between trying to understand the value to customers versus the value to investors, right? And I guess at any given point in time, I think one has to be clear on prioritizing value for customers, not necessarily because value to investors could be short-lived, right? And I'd say I would prioritize value for customers first, right? And I think then the valuation becomes, I think, just secondary, right? And that's what I've actually solved. So these three things would what I would advise any friend.
Great. So for our viewers, this is yet another very diverse set of opinions you're getting from yet another professional in the different domains. So I guess this is adding much more value to my podcast, my set of thesis. So thank you so much, Sam, for adding these questions, adding these points from your end. I'll move on to the last segment of my podcast. While I don't have any coffee, Karan is not accompanying me. And my voucher or the hamper to you will come when I make some great returns for you. I'd like to do some rapid fire for you.
Sure,
So,
sure.
may I? Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
So, to start with, three things you look for when you invest in a startup.
Yeah, I think the product market fit, then the founder market fit, lastly, ability to scale.
Great. Three things which are absolutely red flag for you.
Usage experience and revenue growth from repeat customers minus the experience narrative. I try to look for that, right? Because people think that they would grow infinitely, right? And then, which is where I would actually use the second one. And then I also try to eyeball the valuation to revenue multiple. Right. While I don't have a baseline in mind, and I keep evolving this, but those three things I actually look for, at least at the first level, obviously backed up by the humongous amount of work you guys do, right?
Great. Three sectors you want to take a bet on in future.
Yeah, education for sure. Want to continue to invest in that, right? And then health tech also, right? And the third one, I just kept it open because wherever I happen to be a consumer, I think I lap it up, right? As simple as be anything, right? From food to a service to anything, so to say.
Okay. My next set of questions are this or that. Founder with a strong institutional background or founders with strong operating experience in the domain?
I think initial phase, institutional background. But I guess once they scale up, right, I think you need that operating experience. That's where I actually come from, and that's what I bring to the table. Hence, it's at least the investments we're making in right now, I think, look for strong institutional background.
Okay. Large market with several VC funded players or growing market with lesser competition, what I would call as a white space or a gray space?
The latter, obviously.
Okay. Startup, three options here. One of them you may choose or two. Startup which is profitable from day one, startup with profitability in the foreseeable future, or hyper growth focused startup and profitability comes when it comes.
I'll pick profitability in the foreseeable future.
Okay. Pre-seed seed startup at a lucrative valuation or startup having achieved its PMF but at a premium valuation?
Personal preference, pre-seed seed, with the caveat that I'll keep investing along the way.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This brings me to the end of my podcast. I'm thankful to you for taking out the time, right, Sam? Great.
My
Thank you
pleasure,
so
Ankit.
much, Sam. Thank you so much.